All right, so thanks everybody for coming, you guys. This is the first roundtable of 2022, so thanks for joining us. We've got an excellent lineup of presentations for you guys. If you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, and feel free to take it away.
So my name is Connie Clark. I'm from BCIT, work with within the BSN program. I'm one of the program heads, and I have a couple people with me too to co-present here. So I've got Dion Nordby with me from Providence Healthcare. She's the senior manager in the ICU, and then Laura Parker is another program head, but with BCIT critical care specialty nursing. So we're going to sort of take turns speaking to our part about our BSN pathway into critical care nursing. So a pilot that we developed in partnership with the three of us and the others listed here, Kathy Kennedy, Candy Garasino, and Shelley Fraser. I will start us off here with a land acknowledgement that we've heard a couple, but this one being more that we're coming on Zoom. So we acknowledge that our province of British Columbia is located on the homelands of 203 distinct Indigenous nations and cultures with over 30 different languages and close to 60 unique dialects are spoken in the province. And we ask that you reflect and acknowledge and honor in your own way the First Nations land in which you live, work, and play. So the purpose of our pilot was to create a learning pathway for BSN students to enter into the critical care environment almost immediately after graduation. And you'll see as we work through the pilot, there are several steps, but essentially once they've completed the pathway, they become critical care nurses and working in the ICU. So we also wanted to highlight that this was a really strong partnership that needed to be developed between the health authority, which is Providence Healthcare, and BCIT, BSN, and specialty. So really that triad between the three groups. And this work was started based on work out of the Ministry of Health, the Nursing Policy Secretariat, which identified some key areas in their report about where we needed to develop BSN programs in order to prevent attrition in our profession. And one of the key parts was developing of learning pathways. So thus sparked this partnership between all of us to get students on track to go into different focus of practice, specifically critical care. So the first part of the pathway I'm going to explain just from when they're moving through BSN, and then after I'll pass it on to Dion, who's going to speak to the second part of the pathway, which is once they graduate. So just a little bit of background as well about BCIT's BSN program. We are 9 terms, 3 years, a consolidated program. We also are able to offer every BSN student electives in specialty nursing. So we partner with the specialty nursing department at BCIT, and every student in BSN takes 2 electives. So it fits quite nicely with this pathway because you will see that they take the critical care theory components while they're still in BSN, and that really helps them with that knowledge while they enter into the critical care environment. So our pathway starts in term 6, where students are sort of given information about various focus of practice and specifically critical care, and then they express interest in whatever focus of practice they want. So the students that express into critical care go through this process where they are in a graded scenario. And the point of this is that we want to make sure we're getting students that are well suited into critical care. And as we all know, much higher stakes environment than med-surg, and also requires certain attributes from a student to be able to be successful in this environment. So they go through that process and they have to score fairly high to be eligible for the path. So that happens in term 6. Then they move into term 7, which is our home health primary care rotation. So they do head into the community, and we try to place them in a clinical site that aligns with St. Paul's, with Providence. So in this case, they would be placed in the downtown core, and we have placements there. So that helps with their transition in that patient population. And at this time, they also take the first critical care theory course, so 7120. Then they move into term 8. which is an adult med-surg rotation. So here they are placed at St. Paul's on the 7th floor, which is medicine. And we identified as a big feeder unit into the ICU, patients moving back and forth. So it was a really good fit. And so they go to clinical here and as well take the second critical care theory course, so 7150, which is the ECG course. Now, between the start of term 7 and the end of term 8, they also complete 350 employed student nurse hours, so ESN hours. And this is done at St. Paul's in the ICU. So they're supernumerary and they are under the scope of practice of an ESN, which is set by BCCNM. So they get a lot of exposure into the ICU right there in between those two terms. Then they move into term 9, which is our preceptorship term, and they complete their preceptorship in the ICU at St. Paul's. So again, back to the unit, which they're familiar with from their ESN hours, but now they're in a preceptorship model. So they're buddied with another nurse or two and do shifts alongside with them. So that's a total of 450 hours. Then they graduate, and Dion will speak to that shortly. But I just also want to take a moment to highlight at the bottom of the slide the mentorship support that we've put in place, because we all know that these students are going to require some added support. So they have mentorship points from a BSN faculty member and then the specialty nursing faculty member. So one specialty nursing faculty member will be assigned to them or is assigned to them and has multiple points of contact with them. And then also the staff at St. Paul's, the ICU educator and the charge nurse have been involved, as well as the ESN program out of St. Paul's. They have additional resources and supported as well. And then one other highlight too is that there is throughout the pathway options for exit points for all parties. So should the student decide, you know what, I'm going to take a bit of a different approach and go somewhere else, then we have options for them to transition back into a different focus of practice. And same with St. Paul's, if they decide maybe the student isn't a good fit, then we have ways that we can support the student and St. Paul's to move forward. So just some considerations for us with BSN. And again, going back to that strong partnership that was required with specialty nursing and with Providence to make this work, it was really collaborative. So that was quite necessary. And as you could see, students needed to be selected for their pathway very early in the program. So there wasn't an option for students to enter in later. We had to make sure that we had ongoing assessments for students throughout their transition between term 7, 8, and 9, because even though we want to create students that are ready to enter practice into critical care, our primary focus always has to be that they meet BSN competencies, entry to practice competencies. So if a student is sort of lagging behind and maybe not ready for that environment, we needed to make sure we had safeguards to be able to pull them out. So that was especially focused on the term 8 instructor to make sure that they were assessing them for readiness to the focus practice. We had to have some education for our faculty who are not often critical care nurses, so we support somebody in preceptorship in critical care. And then I spoke to the BSN competencies, and also ensuring the student is very much aware of scope of practice, because I'm sure that all came to your mind is what is a BSN, how does a BSN student's focus of practice fit into the ICU? So it actually fits quite nicely, but we did need to make sure that students were very familiar about their scope of practice and that they could articulate that to staff, because that was something they needed to very much advocate for. And then I spoke to the exit strategy. Okay, now I'm done and I will pass it over to Dion.
Thanks, Connie. So I'm going to provide a bit of the operational lens as well as speak to what that journey looks like for the student once they've graduated from the BSN program. And I'm just going to back up first and just talk about the timeline. So ahead of them graduating with their BSN, there is a second interview process that occurs in which the health authority, us, Providence St. Paul's, is dedicating these students into a critical care education seat. And then subsequent to that, this transition RN position, which I'll talk about in a minute. And why I mention that is because the timing of that is a little bit different than what we historically see. And that might just be something that only a manager cares about, but it is worth mentioning that the stream of hiring looks a little bit different than it would historically with somebody going through a preceptorship who's then hired into the unit that they've preceptored in. So once we have ensured that we've interviewed the candidates are going to be successful, we've allocated them into this critical care education seat, I simultaneously hire them into this transition position. And what that position means or is going to look like is they will continue their journey and their learning in critical care once they're a new graduate nurse, but in this transition position where they continue to be supernumerary, they're working with a mentor or a buddy, similar to what occurs during a preceptorship, but now with an RN scope of practice. The timeline for that is about 4 to 6 months that they'll be in the unit, continuing to develop their experience, their skills, their knowledge, their exposure, as well as the relationships with the people that they'll be working with in the future while they are waiting for the compressed timeframe portion of the critical care education to start. The other thing that's occurring simultaneously is the last course that is part of the distance theory learning of the critical care education is also completed. Once they have completed that 4 to 6 month mentorship transition position, then they enter into the critical care compressed timeframe portion, which is, as most of you will know, the 12-week full-time classroom and clinical that is health authorities sponsored, similar to any other nurse that would be hired into the BCIT critical care education program. And when they graduate, they're a full-fledged certified critical care nurse and will be working in one of our 3 critical care units. So just looking at the timeline for this first pilot, so going back to term 6, that's when, as Connie has highlighted, that's when the stream and the decision making of who the candidates are going to be that BCIT is bringing forward is made. Term 7 and 8 is when they're an employed student nurse. So for us, for this first intake, that occurred between September and March 2022 in the ICU. The students are now currently in their final preceptorship in the ICU, which will be completed the end of June this year. They will be hired into the transition RN position from September to December, and that's just because they're taking the summer off, which is totally reasonable and understandable. And then they start the compressed timeframe portion of the critical care program at BCIT in January with a graduation with their critical care certificate of March. So you can see what's different here in the timeline is that from the time that they graduate with their bachelor's of science to the time that they're certified is only 9 months. So we're cutting that down significantly from the historical critical care stream, which is about 2 to 3 years. However, they're getting 18 months of continuous and ongoing exposure and experience within the critical care environment to ensure the successful transition. So from an employer's perspective, the timing, as I alluded to, is a little bit tricky. And so what's happening right now, what happened a few weeks ago was we did go through the interview process for the 2 candidates that are part of our first pilot. And they hadn't quite started the preceptorship yet. And through that interview process, I'm committing them to a critical care education seat much ahead of the time that we usually would do typically as a manager. So typically as a manager, you would interview somebody close to the end of their preceptorship. You would have a very clear idea of what their clinical practice, their clinical decision-making, and their success on the unit looks like. And in this case, we're hiring them quite a bit ahead of time to when they finish their preceptorship. So we're making a leap of faith and a commitment. And I think the selection process that BCIT and St. Paul's has worked on really helps mitigate the risk. Although, as Connie's alluded to, there is an exit strategy in place in case the students aren't successful. The other part of the timing that's tricky is just, so if you think about the ICU and the CCU at St. Paul's and many of the critical care units that the people on this call work in, we almost continuously have BCIT critical care and HAU RN students. We also have new orientees. We're seeing more and more agency nurses to supplement our staffing. And now we also have the advent of these 3 other roles of students. So employed student nurses, preceptors, and then these transition RNs. So just being attentive and thoughtful in how we are creating assignments to try and address the individual learning needs and the scope of all these different sort of types of nurses or types of students has been something that's been challenging. And we've had to make sure that we're developing resources and continuously educating our bedside staff, our charge nurses, to ensure that they have the information that they need to make decisions around patient assignments and are aware of what the different levels of scope are for the different types of students and or nurses. The other thing that's worth mentioning, we are a CST Cerner site. And so the part of the stream where the students have a clinical placement at our site and thus exposure to Cerner has been a huge advantage, because it is a learning curve and it's just one less thing that they need to be thinking about going into their final preceptorship and learning when they're already in an environment that is, not your typical preceptorship placement. In terms of our critical care staff, obviously, we want to make sure that they feel supported. We're coming out of a 2-year pandemic where everybody feels exhausted. As I mentioned, we have lots of students already in our unit, and we want to be really thoughtful and intentional about how we're selecting our mentors and preceptors to ensure that the students are getting the best possible experience they can. And what we've learned and noticed is that a lot of our senior nurses are part of our critical care outreach team. And so they have periods of time in their rotations where they're actually not working in the unit and they're working out on the wards in the outreach roles. And so we haven't been able to tap into them yet to use as mentors and preceptors, but that's something that we'll probably be looking at in the future. And if there's a way to thread that in. There's obviously the change management perspective and socializing the idea of having this direct stream into critical care, as well as employed student nurses and preceptors in the critical care environment. And although I think it's been met with a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and optimism, there's always going to be some people that it takes a little bit more work to sort of get buy-in and support. And then lastly, the investment. So going through this stream, obviously, it's an investment in time, and it's an investment in human resources. And I think what's different about what we've done here than some of the other direct streams into critical care is really that integrated collaboration between the 3 institutions, the BSN program, the critical care program, as well as the health authority, in working to get the feedback that we need, change on the fly and pivot based on the feedback that we're getting from the students. And then lastly, the money. So from the organizational standpoint, this transition position is something that we haven't historically had. It's unfunded. And so there does have to be buy-in from organizational standpoint and finance to be able to say, yes, you know what, this is important and we're going to fund it. And we've been lucky that that's the position that Providence has taken, and will continue to support as we go through future streams. And that's it for me. I'll hand over to Lara.
Thanks, Dion. So not too much to add on what Connie and Dion has already clearly identified with this really unique and pathway. I think the role that specialty nursing plays, as many of you are familiar with our program, is really during that preceptorship. At the moment in this iteration, we have a touch point with a specialty nursing faculty member, kind of treating those touch points with the BSN students as a debrief. They're getting a lot of support from the preceptors they're already with and their contact person in term 9 with the BSN. So another layer of support to, as we do in many of our critical care clinicals, in our post-conference, we have a debrief opportunity about what's been going on in the environment, from skills to family relations to team relations. So it's an opportunity to provide that added support and a very beneficial support. The triad has been, I think, a huge piece, and Connie and Dion have both speak to that the partnership overall provides just a huge support. And as well, I think, the pathway clearly speaks to the fact that, the students are well supported, and as they get through and they've just had their interviews and will be joining back into the critical care program, we'll be able to identify to them what that pathway looks like as they move through the rest of their education, and soon to be, really, it will come around sooner than later, their March 2023 graduation, and to be full functioning critical care nurses. So I won't add too much more than that, because I think Connie and Dion have really spoken to it. So just be glad to be part of this partnership.
So I'll also try to be quick to wrap us up, but just a detailed summary of note, 800 hours of critical care exposure for these students before they've even graduated, which is huge. And the other thing I wanted to also highlight is that when these students then do move into new grads and onto the unit, we're actually not pulling to repopulate critical care from med-surg units in the health authority. So it's actually improving our pool of critical care nurses, because we're not sort of poaching from other units, which is a big piece, because as we all know, everybody's trying to keep their nurses where they are. So this is really a positive of this pathway. So time in the pathway, we sort of spoke to that with 1 year in BSN and then 9 months post graduation. We have collected feedback from all parties involved. And so just some highlights from the feedback we've got so far. The first round, as Dion sort of mentioned, is that the team has been so accepting of this pilot and these students. They've been welcomed really nicely. They've reported excellent learning opportunities and that they can practice within their scope. They did identify a more structured orientation, which is not sort of unanticipated for us, so we can make those adjustments to help them with some of those pieces, and just better communication of scope of practice with the IC, which we kind of spoke to, and we're not surprised about that either. So we've already sort of come up with strategies between the three of us in how we can smooth that over. And so for our next steps, we've got our first pilot going through preceptorship now, and we actually have a second group coming up behind them, which will start their ESN hours in the summer. They're currently in term 8. And so they will continue to gather feedback and make adjustments and continue with our partnership. Questions?
Thank you. No, I know BGH has got a lot going on because we're going to be having Cerner come in the fall. After that's kind of implemented, are there plans to maybe go to other facilities so that this can be benefited? I'm sure there's a wait list for it, but.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're just doing the pilot right now. So just like I said, we want to see what happens with the students as they move through. And we are planning on doing a lot of work to see if we can make this pathway more broad, because that is one thing that the ministry has wanted with their pathway work, is that the pathways aren't necessarily unique to just one health authority or one BSN program. So it would be great if we could expand it. But at this point, it's just early stages. We're just really happy that the partnership with St. Paul's and BCIT has gone so well, and that the unit has been really receptive. So far so good. And yes, absolutely, we're hoping to expand once we get the first groups through. Emily?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. That was great. I'm excited about this work. I'm one of the clinical nurse specialists for critical care in Fraser. So I have a couple questions. So for their critical care practicum that they go into towards the end of their terms, what kind of orientation is it different than what you would typically provide a student that's going to, say, medicine or a lower acuity area? Like, what did you do anything differently, or what did you provide?
So I saw there was also another question somebody asked about education for the preceptors, and I think that's a really good point, and something that we've been talking about with our CNEs as something that we possibly want to do in the future. We didn't have time to do anything really formalized or structured for the preceptors. However, I do think we were intentional in who we were selecting, in that there were people that ideally would understand what we're trying to accomplish with this. And in one situation, one of the preceptors is a student who had a similar type of stream into critical care in Alberta. So she's very well versed in what this looks like. But I think ultimately what I would love to have, if we continue to do this and I'm able to get funding, is a position in critical care that is dedicated to both this stream, supporting this stream, but also mentorship within the critical care unit itself, because we are working with more novice nurses with less experience, more and more, and then also this stream. Yeah. So I think that's what my ideal hope would be for the future, to be able to support both the staff who are mentoring and preceptoring, as well as the.
Thank you for coming and sharing the details about your program. This sounds fantastic. I wish this was available when I went through critical care. So this has been awesome. Amazing attendance today. Thank you everybody for showing up and listening to some of the really awesome, innovative quality improvement projects going on around BC.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the BC chapter of the CACCN YouTube channel. We have a lot of great content from previous events we've had over the past 12 months. I would suggest subscribe and hit the notification button so you can know when the next thing is out. And if you ever want to come to our next event, We're on Facebook and on Instagram. Our links are listed below. And while I'm on the topic, if you're a critical care nurse anywhere in Canada, why don't you join CACCN? We have a ton of resources to help you be the best critical care nurse you can be. Go to caccn.ca and join us.